Hello, my name is Shannon Allen, and I'm a doctoral psychology student at North Central University. Today's presentation will focus on promoting prosocial behaviors and discouraging antisocial behaviors in teens. During today's lecture, I'm going to go over some definitions that are relevant to the topic, theories of and research on behavior, and strategies for fostering prosocial behaviors. Let's start today's lecture by defining prosocial and antisocial. Prosocial behaviors are behaviors that benefit others, such as sharing and being helpful. Being cooperative and respectful of rules and engaging in socially appropriate behaviors is also considered prosocial. Prosocial behaviors may be driven by empathy and altruism. Individuals may be motivated to engage in prosocial behaviors because of their own need to be accepted and maintain a positive reputation, and also the egoistic expectation of reciprocity. In school settings, prosocial behaviors among students have been found to positively impact motivation for learning and increase positive contributions to the classroom as well as the entire student population. Antisocial behaviors, on the other hand, lack consideration for, violate the rights of, harm, or disrupt the well-being of others. Antisocial behaviors have also been defined as actions that violate the norms of social conduct. In school settings, antisocial behaviors can impact teens' cognitive abilities, such as cooperative problem solving. Before we get into interventions that promote social behaviors and discourage antisocial behaviors, I want to go over some theories that explain what influences behaviors. There are generally two schools of behavioral development, and I'm sure you've probably heard of these before. They are nature and nurture. Nature generally involves genes, personality traits, and dispositions, while nurture involves environmental, situational, and cultural influences. So let's look at some of the theories from the perspective of nature. We'll begin with the evolutionary theory, or also known as natural selection, and then later reconceptualized by Herbert Spencer as survival of the fittest. This theory was initially introduced by Charles Darwin and expanded upon by Sigmund Freud through his clinical observations. Darwin wrote of survival of the fittest in his book, The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication. This preservation, during the battle for life, of varieties which possess any advantage in structure, constitution, or instinct. While Darwin or Spencer did not necessarily mean this to imply that only the most aggressive will survive, based on his clinical observations, Freud found that to be somewhat true. According to Freud, the id, the primitive part of the mind, drove individuals towards aggressive battles for resources needed for survival. He named this drive thanatos, which is translated as the death drive, and means manifest behaviors such as aggressive, repetitive compulsion and destruction. So, in other words, Freud believed that antisocial behavior was a product of self-preservation. However, the Darwinian Spencer theory of survival of the fittest could also be translated as self-preservation as a product of cooperation. Susan Fiske, for example, believed that prosocial behavior within the context of survival of the fittest meant belongingness and sharing resources to survive. In fact, empathy has a strong evolutionary root. The evolutionary theory of kin selection argues that individuals favor behaviors that may increase the chance of survival of their kin, but may decrease the chances of their own survival. So, from Fiske's perspective, prosocial behavior is a product of self-preservation. Behavior genetics, also known as psychogenetics, can be traced to the 1800s with Sir Francis Galton, who actually coined the term nature versus nurture. But it wasn't until the mid-1900s that geneticist Ronald Fisher took a closer look at how specific genes impacted complex traits. Contemporary researchers have continued exploring the relationship between genes and behaviors. For example, several combined studies found that 10% of families may account for 50% of criminal wrongdoings. This suggests that criminal behaviors may be hereditary. Another study that focused on the MAOA gene, also known as the warrior gene, that is related to antisocial behavior. Men are more susceptible to MAOA mutations. Another study examined a Dutch family who were notorious for having reactively aggressive male members. All of the male members had rare MAOA mutations. On the other hand, some researchers have suggested that prosocial behaviors are inborn. For example, Hoffman found that newborns have automatic responses to other newborns. When one baby begins crying, other babies tend to cry as well. Hoffman described this as a global empathetic distress response. He called this response global because newborns cannot differentiate between themselves and others. By age 1, children tend to have egocentric empathetic distress responses, and that they engage in self-comfort behaviors such as thumb-sucking when they see another in distress. Beginning at age 2 to 3, children begin to understand and respond empathetically to others' needs and feelings. Hoffman called this the vertical empathy for another's distress because it is less egocentric and more other-centered. So these studies on the genetic underpinnings of behavior may leave us asking, if children are already predisposed to certain behaviors, then what can we really do? Some children may be inherently antisocial and some prosocial. However, it's essential to note that behavior development is more complicated than genetics and heredity. Psychologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner proposed a theory that showed the complexities of child development. His ecological systems theory illustrates how many different influences impact behavior, and it also opens the door for interventions from parents, teachers, psychologists, and so on. So according to Bronfenbrenner, development is interactions over time between the inherent characteristics of the child and their different environments. So his model sees development as interactions between nature and nurture. Now bear in mind that while Bronfenbrenner is considered a child development model, it applies to individuals throughout their lifespan. So let's quickly look at these environments or systems as they are referred to by Bronfenbrenner. The ecological systems model begins with the individual and their inherent characteristics. The microsystem is the smallest yet the most immediate environment that the individual interacts with. This environment generally consists of daily exposure and may include the home environment, school environment, peer group, and the immediate community. The mesosystem is the interactions between the different microsystems. For example, how involved are parents in the adolescent's friendships would illustrate linkages between the home environment and the peer group. The exosystem is connections that might exist between different settings that do not necessarily directly impact the child, but affect them nonetheless. For example, a parent may lose a job, and while this does not directly impact the child, the stress from financial struggles may trickle down to the child. The macrosystem is the most distal influence and involves cultural values and patterns that impact the development of dominant ideas and beliefs. An example of a macrosystem is socioeconomic status. Children who grow up in poverty may have more home responsibilities than, say, children from middle and upper class families. Lastly, the chronosystem explains changes to the individual's different systems over time. For example, the death of a loved one may impact a toddler differently than it affects a teen. So with a focus on nurture type influences, let's look at ways to promote prosocial behaviors and discourage antisocial behaviors in teens. With regard to school settings, one study examined several variables within schools that were associated with prosocial behaviors. Researchers found that children exposed to reasonable academic demands and social support from peers and teachers were more likely to show behaviors such as caring, sharing, and cooperation. Teacher support had a more significant effect on females in particular, especially those who are experiencing acute stress. So, essentially, a positive school climate reduces antisocial behaviors. But let's break this down to specifics. As parents and teachers, here are 10 ways to promote prosocial behaviors and discourage antisocial behaviors. Let's start with rules and discipline. Patterson found that antisocial behaviors can often be attributed to parenting that uses coercive tactics. For example, children of parents who use harsh punishments and have inconsistent rules and parenting practices instead of fair, firm, and clear rules, punishments, and warm responses to misbehaviors are more likely to exhibit antisocial behaviors throughout their lifespan. From an ecological perspective, teachers can contribute to the escalation of antisocial behaviors by engaging in coercive tactics as well. Therefore, a school climate that has clear, fair, and consistently enforced rules have been shown to have the fewest discipline problems. Along the same lines, studies have shown that positive behavior is seldom rewarded, while problematic behaviors are disproportionately punished. So teachers who spend more time focused on antisocial behaviors rather than prosocial behaviors risk increasing aggressive behaviors, especially from teens who come from volatile home environments. However, school-wide structured reward systems for prosocial behaviors as well as teacher warmth are characteristics of schools with low discipline issues. One study found that poor academic achievement was often predictive or co-occurred with antisocial behavior. More specifically, they found that poor academic achievement was related to the onset, seriousness, frequency, and persistence of antisocial behaviors in both adolescent boys and girls. The same study indicated that interventions that improve academic performance co-occur with a decrease in antisocial behaviors. While these studies do not necessarily explain causation, another study concluded that the higher a school's academic quality, the lower the level of antisocial behaviors, and vice versa. So let's look at some ways to enhance academic achievement. In an attempt to determine a way that teachers could enhance academic achievement, researchers integrated educational research with psychological theories and developed a contextual framework for determining the academic success of students. In short, structure impacted a student's perception of school competence, which in turn influenced their engagement and academic performance. For example, giving clear directions and learning objectives, maintaining consistent academic expectations, and handling conduct issues in the least disruptive manner as possible resulted in a decrease of antisocial behaviors. Another way to enhance academic achievement and reduce antisocial behaviors is to instill a growth mindset. A growth mindset is a belief that intelligence is malleable and can be achieved through hard work. Reversely, a fixed mindset is a belief that intelligence is static and cannot be improved. The growth mindset teacher puts more focus on the degree of effort rather than the outcome. There are small but effective ways that teachers can nurture a growth mindset. For example, you may want to consider the following when offering feedback. Instead of saying you did the best you could, try it's okay if you don't understand it yet, then move on to another aspect of the assignment. Instead of saying you'll eventually get it, just keep trying, offer if you can't figure it out, try looking at it from a different perspective. Perhaps try writing out the question or problem or draw a picture of it. Instead of saying, excellent work, you're so smart, try, great job. It looks as though your flashcards really helped a lot. You should make flashcards for future tests. Another way to encourage a growth mindset is to use diverse instructional strategies. For example, video clips, audio clips, and physical aids. You can also allow students to work individually, in pairs, and in groups. And lastly, in addition to tests, allow students to present their understanding of materials through projects and presentations. Next, allow students the opportunity to expand their knowledge. For example, after each lesson, have a Q&A session with you, the teacher, or divide students into groups and allow them to answer each other's questions. Another way is to explain how abstract concepts pertain to the real world. For example, explain why the idea is significant, how can it be used outside of the classroom, and how can the concept be useful to students in the future. Another way is to allow for goal-based journaling. The SMART method of journaling is recommended as it helps students track their progress. The goals should be specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time-based. Lastly, teachers can help children change their language to growth language. For example, add the word yet to the end of sentences, like, I'm not good at math yet. I don't understand this question yet. Okay, so I'm going to go over one other strategy for increasing academic achievement, and that's the direct instruction model. This model has been shown to produce the most significant academic gains, specifically in reading and math. In addition, the direct instruction model has also been shown to increase self-esteem. While this model differs significantly from some of the growth mindset activities, it is particularly successful for disadvantaged children and slow learners. Direct instruction is an evidence-based practice that provides explicit, guided instructions and strict lesson plans that exclude discussions and group work. Generally, the lesson plan includes scripted instructions and specific activities for a set period of time. The features that make direct instruction successful is that 10% of the material is new, while 90% is a review of the previously taught topics. Also, students are grouped based on their level of skill as determined by a pre-assessment, and the pace is set by the group's ability to learn the content presented. So, I've illustrated the relationship between antisocial behaviors and poor academic performance. But there is also an unintended consequence of academic failures, and that's alienation. Alienated students tend to form relationships with like students, and what results are groups of antisocial peer influences. One study indicated that children who were rejected by peers and had low academic achievement by age 10 would reliably engage in antisocial peer group behaviors by age 12. Another study indicated that once a child becomes a member of a deviant peer group, they have a 70% chance of a felony arrest within the next 2 years. So here are some strategies that teachers can use to foster positive peer relationships. Responsive classroom morning meetings involve greetings and sharing. Students can share important life events while the teacher and classmates engage in empathetic comments or ask for more clarification. Take advantage of teachable moments in modeling. For example, thinking out loud when a conflict arises can provide the class with insight into decision-making and self-reflection skills. Some questions to ask may be, is there another way to see this situation? How would I feel if I were in this person's shoes? Is there something in the past that may have made this person feel or act this way? And am I willing to be open to a respectful discussion? And third, role-playing is an excellent way for students to practice perspective-taking skills in a safe environment. The best role-playing activities involve opportunities that may occur in real-life settings. Research indicates that inadequate parent supervision is an antecedent to antisocial behaviors. From an ecological perspective, the same is true for schools and communities. School crimes often occur in unmonitored areas such as hallways, bathrooms, locker rooms, and stairwells, thus leaving students with a lack of confidence in the adults in their school and, of course, an increase in fear. One national survey found that 20% of students reported carrying guns to school, and 5% of students felt unsafe attending school at least once in a 30-day period. However, effective monitoring increases social controls against antisocial behaviors. One study found that a monitoring and mapping strategy decreased antisocial behaviors and increased student confidence. Monitoring and mapping involves studying and evaluating the locations and times when and where deviant behaviors occur. This included interviewing students, teachers, librarians, cafeteria workers, hall monitors, and so on. For example, this particular study found that older students tended to congregate and engage in undesirable behaviors in the parking lot before and after school. Younger students reported being bullied by older students during lunch and before school at the school entrance. And most students felt unprotected in the hallways between classes. Now, while it may be impractical for schools to place monitors in every hotspot during prime times that issues occurs, the monitoring and mapping surveys and interviews help the school use the resources they already have on hand by increasing the teachers and staff present at specific times and locations rather than having monitors at all areas and at all times. So now I'd like to discuss the influence of mass media and popular culture on antisocial behaviors. And I want to go over a couple of similar concepts. The first is media contagion, and it's linked to mass shootings. And the other is copycat crimes and their relation to popular culture. But I want to make a distinction between media and popular culture, at least for the purpose of this lecture. Media is in reference to the news, and popular culture is in reference to television shows, movies, video games, and so on. So recently the Violence Project published a database on specific characteristics of mass shootings and mass shooters, and they found that the majority of mass shooters sought to validate their motives through media coverage of other mass shootings. In addition, the increased fear and curiosity that accompanies mass shootings, the media coverage tends to increase significantly, and that all but promises potential shooters notoriety. The Violence Project referred to this influence as media contagion. Contagion may explain why mass shootings tend to occur in clusters. In fact, another study found that expanded media coverage of mass shootings increased the likelihood of a similar event within 2 weeks of the initial event. For example, the Columbine shooting is probably the most covered mass school shooting in history. In the weeks following the Columbine shootings, law enforcement uncovered and foiled 74 like events across 30 different states. In addition, the Virginia Tech shooting, the most deadly school shooting in modern history, was inspired by Columbine. The next study focuses on popular culture's influence on copycat crimes. While violent media is not necessarily an antecedent to like behaviors for most people, some people will be negatively influenced. And it's not yet understood what individual characteristics are predictive of imitative influences. However, approximately 25% of violent offenders reported that they were influenced by popular culture. Nonetheless, researchers have identified some theoretical mechanisms that might contribute to violent imitative influences. First, media violence offers a cathartic conduit by which to fantasize about aggressive behaviors. Second, social learning theory posits that individuals will be more likely to mimic their behaviors when aggressive characters are rewarded. Third, violent media can plant cues related to aggressive behavior, making them easily accessible, and may result in adverse outcomes when combined with volatile emotional states. Fourth, some individuals may become physiologically aroused when they view violent media. Fifth, frequent intake of violent media can desensitize an individual's reaction to aggression and violence. And lastly, violent media might induce high levels of fear, which in turn induces hypervigilant behaviors. So, how can teachers and parents prevent contagion and copycat behaviors? Psychologist Dave Grossman, a renowned expert on the psychology of violence, wrote in his book, Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill, that adolescents who were encouraged to develop talents and hobbies outside of screen technology were less likely to be influenced by violent media. Another study indicated that alienated children were most likely to be influenced by violent media. So, as previously mentioned, fostering positive peer support groups can mediate imitative influences. So I think we can agree that prosocial behavior is also moral behavior. We develop moral agency based on social norms. Moral agency is knowing what is right and wrong. So in sum, society generally determines what is right and wrong. And as previously discussed, antisocial behavior is defined as behavior that violates social norms. According to Bandura, however, individuals who are otherwise empathetic and prosocial can, under some circumstances, morally disengage and take part in antisocial behaviors. Bandura explains some of the common reasons or justifications as to why good people can do bad things, and he called these the loci of moral disengagement. Moral justification is described as justification of antisocial behaviors explained in terms of the value of the purpose. For example, a child may physically harm a bully and try to justify it because they said the bully was hurting a child of a different race. Euphemistic language is used to sanitize the behavior to make it seem less severe. For example, an adolescent may say, "I didn't steal the cell phone, I just borrowed it." Advantageous comparison occurs when a child may compare their behavior to something significantly worse to make their act seem more trivial. For example, a child may say, "I just stole a cell phone, but Mark put a kid in the hospital." Displacement of responsibility occurs when the individual blames others or the situation for their behaviors. For example, one might say, Well, the teacher didn't say I couldn't do it. Distorting the consequences is minimizing the harm. For example, I stole the phone, but her parents are rich, they can just buy her another one. Dehumanization occurs when an individual perceives another of having fewer human qualities. For example, a child from a family with a high socioeconomic status may think it's okay to bully a child from a family with a lower socioeconomic status. Lastly, attribution of blame occurs when the individual believes that the victim provoked the behavior. For example, a child might say, I stole her phone because she wouldn't stop bragging about it. So how do we prevent adolescents from morally disengaging? One study examined the efficacy of 2 intervention strategies and found a decrease in moral disengagement after adolescents received critical thinking and social regulation intervention. This intervention aimed to teach students when a peer was attempting to justify bad behaviors and how to offer morally engaging alternatives. The intervention is divided into 5 sessions. During session 1, teachers explain the purpose of the intervention, then use a story about a boy who uses moral disengagement to justify buying some ice cream with fake money. This is to explain the process of moral disengagement. The students were then divided into groups to discuss what happened in the story. Session 2 focuses on perspective. This session involves more hypothetical stories that include moral disengagement mechanisms. For this study, the researchers focused on the processes most commonly used by adolescents: advantageous comparisons, attribution of blame, and diffusion of responsibility. Then, the facilitator led a contest whereby students had to locate and identify moral disengagement processes from provided materials such as books, news stories, and magazines. The third session focused on social regulation. The activity for this session was to have students identify moral disengagement processes in real time. 2 students were asked to read provided scripts. Other students were asked to call out pirate excuses and hold up a card with a pirate on it when one of the characters in the story used a moral disengagement mechanism. The fourth session focused on self-reflection. The students were asked to write about a recent situation where they did something that they knew was wrong. Then they were asked to write about how they felt about it, why they felt that way, and if they used a moral disengagement mechanism. And the last session, session 5, focused on providing alternative options to moral disengagement. Students were assigned to pairs and asked to read the previous session's story to their partner. Then they brainstormed together to identify moral engaging alternatives. The Roots of Empathy program is a 9-month in-school program for students and parents to help students develop an understanding of emotions and promote social behaviors, and to help parents increase their knowledge about child development and effective parenting. Each month, a parent and infant that the classroom adopts at the beginning of the school year visits the class. During these monthly visits, a row instructor teaches growth and development through interactions with and observations of the infant and parents. In addition, row instructors visit the classroom 2 other times during the month, one time for a pre-family discussion and another time for a post-family discussion. The lessons for the pre- and post-family discussions are designed to foster emotional understanding, empathy, and problem-solving skills, using the infant-parent interactions as a foundation for conversations about caring for others, perspective-taking, effective parenting, and infant development. Each lesson provides an opportunity for children to learn about the different layers of empathy. For example, identifying and explaining different emotions and emotional sensitivity. Teachers are also asked to incorporate role lessons into the general curriculum. One study that examined the efficacy of Roe found that 8th grade participants had a better understanding and perspective of distress emotions in others, showed significant improvement in prosocial behavior recognition, and significantly declined in proactive and relational aggression. In closing, I'd like to overview the 10 strategies for increasing prosocial behavior and decreasing antisocial behavior. First, clear, fair, and consistently enforced rules. Positive reinforcement, structured classroom environments, nurturing a growth mindset, direct instruction for disadvantaged and slow learning students, fostering positive peer support, safety monitoring, encouraging non-screen hobbies and interests, critical thinking and social regulation intervention, and roots of empathy. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this lecture, and I hope that I've given you some ideas for interventions that will help you build a positive home and school environment.